The rope snapped. Sarah McAllister's hands flew to the wagon seat as the wheel dropped into the ravine, tilting everything sideways. Her carpet bag slid across the bed, and she grabbed for it, ribs screaming where William Thornton's fists had landed 3 days before. "Cedar Ridge," the driver called, spitting tobacco juice. "End of the line, lady." She climbed down into dust and heat that hit like a furnace blast. Her torn traveling dress clung to bruised skin. The purple marks on her arms drew stares from men lounging in whatever shade they could find. "Well, well," the voice came from the depot's shadow. "Look what the stage dragged in." 3 men stepped forward. The thin one with yellow teeth looked her up and down like livestock at auction. "Damaged goods," another said, chuckling, "but might still have some use." Sarah's back hit the wagon. The driver was already climbing to his seat, eager to leave. Around them, townspeople watched with the detached curiosity of those who'd seen too much to interfere. "Please," she whispered, "I don't want trouble." "Trouble?" The thin man stepped closer. Whiskey breath. "We ain't offering trouble, sweetheart. Just business. Woman alone in a town like this, there's ways to earn your keep." The lady said she doesn't want trouble. The voice came from behind them. Deep, steady as bedrock. Sarah saw him for the first time as the men turned. Tall in the dusty street, broad-shouldered, weathered face that could be 30 or 45. Dark hair under a worn hat. Canvas pants, faded blue shirt boots worn at the heels. A rancher. But it was his eyes that held her. Gray as winter sky. No pity, no desire. Just calm assessment reading her whole story in bruises and torn fabric. "This ain't your concern, Coleman," the thin man said, stepping back half a step. "I'm making it my concern." Coleman's hand rested near his pistol, not threatening, ready. "This woman's coming with me." Not a question, statement of fact. Sarah's heart hammered. Another claim of ownership. But something in his bearing was different. He hadn't looked at her the way the others had. Hadn't seen prey. "Tom, you've got a wife and 3 daughters at home." Coleman's voice stayed level. "You really want to be the kind of man who bargains over a beaten woman like she's a side of beef." Tom flinched. "And you, Pete? Your mother still takes in washing. How'd she feel knowing her son was playing vulture?" The men shifted uncomfortably. "Small town. Everyone knew everyone." "We weren't going to," Pete mumbled. "No," Coleman agreed. "You weren't." The standoff held. Then Tom spat and turned away. "Ain't worth the trouble. Come on, boys." They slouched toward the saloon. Coleman waited until they disappeared before turning to Sarah. Lines carved deep around his eyes from squinting into sunrises. Clean-shaven, but rough like he'd used a dull razor. When he really looked at her, she saw something flicker. Recognition, like he knew what it was to be broken and alone. "You're coming with me," he said. Same words the others might have used. Entirely different meaning. I can't pay you. I have nothing." "Didn't ask for anything?" He picked up her bag with his left hand, keeping his right free. "Got a wagon at the livery. 30 miles to cover before dark." He started walking, then paused when she didn't move. Sarah stood frozen. Was she trading one captivity for another? Or was this weathered stranger offering what he seemed to be, simple sanctuary? "Ma'am." Coleman turned back, the faintest softening in his expression. "Those ribs need tending. My ranch has supplies and a bed you can rest in. That's all I'm offering. A place to heal and figure your next move. Nothing more unless you want it to be." The directness decided her. In a land full of liars and sweet-talkers, plain speech felt like solid ground. Sarah took a careful step forward, then another. Coleman fell into step beside her, not too close, maintaining distance. People stepped aside for him. Not from fear, from wary respect. "Thank you," she whispered. "No need. Man sees someone needs help, he helps." But Sarah knew it was more. In a town where beaten women were damaged goods, where bruises marked her as prey, this quiet rancher had seen her as human. They walked toward the livery and whatever lay beyond. Sarah allowed herself the faintest spark of hope. She was still lost, still broken, still far from home. But for the first time since stepping off that train in Tucson, she wasn't alone. The sun continued its assault on Cedar Ridge, but walking beside Joe Coleman toward his wagon and unknown horizon, It didn't seem quite so punishing. The wagon creaked under desert heat. Coleman drove with steady, calm eyes fixed ahead, where mesas shimmered like mirages. Sarah dozed fitfully, jerking awake when wheels hit ruts, her ribs protesting. When they crested a low rise, she saw his ranch spread below. Her chest loosened. Nothing grand, but honest. Adobe house sitting solid against landscape. Straight barn, clean corrals. Everything spoke of careful maintenance, hard work. "It ain't much," Coleman said, first words in miles, "but it's quiet. Quiet." After days of shouting and fists and fear, quiet sounded like salvation. Inside the cabin, warmth hit them immediately. One room with a short wall suggesting separation. Wood stove, rough table, 2 beds. His and a smaller one with a colorful quilt. Coleman gestured toward the smaller bed. "Yours if you want it. No rules about doors locked or unlocked. No demands about chores or restrictions." He wasn't pretending ownership gave him rights. "I'll make food," he said. "You can wash. Basin's there." He ladled stew into 2 bowls, set one near her bed, one at the table. Didn't sit across from her. Gave her space to decide. She chose the floor by the fire, cross-legged. He sat at the table. 2 people in silence that wasn't hostile, just heavy with new facts. Sarah ate slowly, listening to the scrape of her spoon. Coleman cleared the bowls when they finished. Laid extra blankets on her bed, and a chair nearby in case she didn't want the bed at all. Night settled. He banked the fire, blew out the lamp. The cabin sank into orange glow. She lay on the small bed, eyes open. He lay on the larger one, staring at roof beams, both listening to the stove tonight outside, to each other's presence. Neither slept, but neither left. Morning broke cold. Coleman woke to wind pushing against walls. She was curled on her side, eyes closed, but not deeply asleep. The furrow in her brow told him she'd stayed awake most of the night. He moved quietly. Stoked the fire, put water on. When he stepped outside, air bit deep. He fed the mule, gave oats to hens, checked the lean-to where a broken hinge needed mending. When he returned, she was awake, sitting upright, legs pulled close. The coat still covered her, but the torn dress underneath showed more than it hid. "I made coffee," he said, setting a tin cup near her bed. "No sugar." She looked at it, but didn't reach. "I'll be fixing fence line today. Section down past the North Trail. Tools outside if you know them. You can stay here or come. Your choice." He didn't tell her she was free. Freedom was a word too many men used before doing the opposite. She eventually stood, testing weight on her feet with quiet stiffness. Coleman pulled worn moccasins from a shelf. "They might fit. If not, I'll fix them." She looked at them, then up at him. Gave the faintest nod. By the time he was halfway to the fence line, she was behind him. Walking slowly, wrapped in his coat, moccasins on her feet, hair braided back. She didn't ask what to do. Just watched him drive posts, tie wire reset beams. After an hour, she picked up a second post and began helping. Her hands were rough, capable. She'd done this kind of labor before. They worked without speaking. Wind carried dust around their boots. When they rested, he poured water into a shared canteen. She drank carefully, gave it back. That afternoon at the cabin, Coleman chopped wood behind the barn. She knelt by the chicken coop inspecting the hinge, disappeared, and came back with wire and a rusted nail. Fixed it herself. She didn't eat much that night. Few bites of salted pork, a biscuit. Ate slowly, like she had to remind herself to do it. Eyes never straying far from him. Not suspicious. Aware. Coleman cleaned dishes, lit the oil lamp, took out wood and nails. Started measuring space near her cot. She sat nearby, arms around knees, watching him hammer slowly. She finally spoke. Voice soft, cracked from disuse. "Why?" He paused. "Why'd you take me?" He set the hammer down, looked at her. "Because no one else should have. And because I had room. I don't want to be owned. You're not. Not wife. No, not slave. No." She nodded once, sharp and final. That was the deal. Later that night, Coleman sat by the fire cleaning an old bridle. She moved toward the stove, placed a blanket near it, lay down on the floor instead of the cot. When he looked at her, she said nothing, just stared at the ceiling. He left her be. She didn't trust the bed. That was fine. Trust would take time. Outside, coyotes howled. Inside, warmth spread across floorboards. Coleman looked over once before turning in. Her eyes were still open, watching dark beams above. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, just alert. And she hadn't run. Morning came with frost edging windows. Coleman woke early, sliding out of bed in practiced silence. She was still on the floor beside the stove, curled under the blanket, one hand tucked beneath her head. He dressed, stepped outside. Ice had formed over the water trough. He broke it with his boot heel-filled buckets to bring inside. When he came back, she was up, standing by the window, arms crossed. Still wrapped in his coat. She didn't startle when he entered, but her body went tenser. "There's hot water on the stove," he said, "if you want to wash proper." She didn't answer, just nodded once. He turned his back, gave her space. While she cleaned herself, he busied himself frying salt pork, grinding coffee beans. When she finished, she'd cleaned her face and arms. Hair was damp, brushed back, shoulders less rigid. They ate at the table this time. Not speaking, not avoiding either. She watched between bites. His face, how he held his fork, how methodically he chewed. "You ever work a ranch before?" he asked finally, slow to respond. "My father had sheep, not cattle, but I worked." He nodded. "I can tell." She glanced at him, then back at her hands. "Why do you live alone?" Coleman shifted. "My wife died, long time ago." Her face didn't change. Eyes dropped to dirt. "You had children?" "No." She nodded like she understood something unspoken. After a moment, "They sold me because I wouldn't obey. Wasn't quiet enough." He didn't answer. Just watched her face. No tears. No pity in the telling. She wasn't looking for sympathy. Just saying what needed saying so it wouldn't rot inside. "You don't have to be quiet here," he said. She looked at him again, long and hard. "Even if I speak against you." He met her gaze evenly. "You can say what you need." That night she slept in the cot instead of the floor. Coleman noticed when he rose to bank the fire. She'd pulled blankets tight to her chest arm, curled under her cheek. More at peace than any night prior. The next morning, he left a folded shirt by her bed. Soft cotton, something his wife had once sewn, but never wore. She picked it up, held it to her chest, then laid it aside. By the third week, she helped him mend the chicken pen, collected eggs, swept the cabin when he went to pasture. As dusk came, she stood at the threshold, staring toward western hills. He came up behind her quietly. "You looking for something? Sometimes I think I'll see someone. My sister, maybe. Something from before." She turned. "But never comes." He nodded. "I looked too every Sunday." She didn't ask what he meant. They stood in the doorway together as sun dipped low. Side by side, not touching, not speaking more. Something had shifted. Spring broke like fever. One day, sharp and gray, next warm enough for bare sleeves. Snow retreated in patches, letting brown earth peek through. But the thaw brought noise. Distant gunfire in woods. A rider seen too close to their trail. Coleman tensed like an old hound with ears pricked. Then came the knock. Midday. She was inside feeding the baby she'd discovered growing within her Seth, out gathering wood. Coleman opened the door to find a man he didn't know. Long coat shotgun across his back badge, pinned to chest. A marshal. Not local. "You Coleman?" the man asked. Coleman stepped aside slightly. Silent, yes. "Name's Bram. Came from 2 towns over looking for a girl. Name's Sarah." She stepped from shadows before Coleman could say anything. Held the child close, eyes narrowed. "Why?" The marshal looked surprised. "Didn't expect you to show yourself." "I'm done running," she said. He nodded. "There's trouble brewing in town. The preacher's son didn't take kindly to being arrested. His father's stirring folks. Some want blood. They blame you." Sarah's face didn't change. "They already blamed me once?" Coleman's hand curled at his side. Didn't reach for his gun, but the tension in his shoulders said he wanted to. "What do you want from me?" she asked. Bram looked between them. "Just to warn you. And tell you something else. Your brother's got folks whispering. Told the whole town what your father did. Folks are listening." Sarah blinked. "Seth's not a boy anymore, ma'am. He's fighting like a man." Pride and fear tangled in her chest. "Town might come for you," Bram said finally. or might not. But if it does figure, you ought to be ready. He tipped his hat, turned, rode off, without another word. That night they didn't talk much. Coleman stood by the door longer than usual, one hand on frame, other near his rifle. Sarah sat with the baby, holding her tighter than before. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. Coleman didn't lie. "Maybe. And if they do," he looked at her weight in his eyes, making her stomach twist, "they won't get through me." 2 nights later, it started. Seth saw them first. 3 men at tree line, moving quiet, thinking they weren't spotted. Sarah shoved the baby into her cradle, whispering prayers, while Coleman grabbed the rifle off the mantel. "They won't stop at talking," he said. She looked at him. "We don't have to stay. We can run." "No, they need to know you're not prey anymore." Her hands shook. "Then I'm standing with you." He nodded once. "Get Seth inside. Keep the baby close." But Seth wouldn't go. The boy stood in the doorway, holding a stick like weapon eyes fierce. "I'm not hiding." Coleman knelt, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're brave. But brave men know when to protect the ones who can't fight. Your sister needs you. That baby needs you." Seth bit his lip, nodded, stepped inside. The first shot came low, scattering snow. Coleman returned fire, dropping to one knee, aiming with calm precision. Sarah ducked behind porch beams, fingers curled around the pistol Coleman had pressed into her palm weeks ago. One man broke cover. Coleman dropped him with a shot to the leg. Others fell back confused. They hadn't expected resistance. Another figure emerged. Older, taller. The preacher. Sarah's breath caught. "I only came to speak," the man called. Coleman didn't lower his rifle. "You brought guns to talk. You brought shame to our town," the preacher spat. "Led your daughter into sin." "I led her nowhere," Coleman growled. "She made it out because you tried to bury her." The preacher stepped forward. "That child she carries, it's filth." Coleman didn't flinch. "Then why are you the one covered in mud?" The preacher's face twisted. "You'll regret protecting her." But before he could say more, a second voice rang from the trees. "Leave them be." Seth. The boy had slipped out, back, climbed a tree, now stood tall on a branch, voice steady, echoing through woods. "She's my sister. That baby's family. You want them, you come through me too." The preacher faltered. His men looked uneasy. Then a third voice joined. "Bram!" The martial rifle raised, mounted behind the retreating men. "This ends here," Bram said, "or it ends with rope." The preacher froze, turned, vanished into woods. Later, when fire was low and house safe again, Sarah sat beside Coleman, her hand on his. "You stayed," she said. "I told you I would." When she looked at him, she knew. He wasn't just the man who saved her. He was the one who'd never let her fall again. The discovery happened by accident. Sarah was cleaning their room when she knocked over books on the high shelf. As she bent to retrieve them, something else fell. A leather portfolio, worn and cracked. She shouldn't have looked, but it had fallen open, and the image staring up made her freeze. A charcoal drawing of a woman executed with obvious skill. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, secretive smile. Not her. Someone else who had mattered enough to be captured in loving detail. Behind the portrait were letters in feminine handwriting, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a wanted poster yellow with age. Joseph Coleman, wanted for murder in Missouri Territory, armed and dangerous. Reward $500. The sketch was cruder than the charcoal drawing, but recognizable. Joe, years younger, clean-shaven, with eyes that held none of the steady calm she knew. She was still kneeling, portfolio in her lap, when his boots sounded on the porch. No time to return it. He entered to find her frozen, guilty evidence of her snooping plain between them. Joe stopped in the doorway. His face went very still. Not anger. The look of a man watching something precious slip away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It fell and It's all right. Was bound to come out eventually." He moved slowly, as if she were a spooked horse. Sat on bed edge, suddenly looking every one of his years. "Her name was Elizabeth," he said finally. "My wife." Wife. The word hit like a physical blow. "We had a small farm outside Independence. She kept chickens, had a garden twice the size of yours. Could make anything grow." His voice held tenderness that made Sarah's chest tight. "We were married 3 years. Happy years." He fell silent. Sarah waited. "There was a man, Samuel Morrison, Owned neighboring property, wanted our water rights. Offered to buy us out, but Elizabeth loved that place. Wouldn't hear of leaving. Joe's hands clenched and unclenched. Morrison didn't like being told no, especially by a woman. Sarah could see where this was going. Felt sick with the knowledge. I was in town when he came by that last time. Brought 2 hands with him. Elizabeth was alone. Joe's voice went flat, emotionless. Neighbor boy saw them ride up. Heard her screaming. By time he fetched me. He stopped, swallowed hard. She was still alive when I got there. Barely. Had time to tell me she loved me, that it wasn't my fault. Died in my arms right there in her garden. Blood soaking into soil she'd tended so careful. Tears ran down Sarah's face, but she didn't move. This pain was his to share or hold. I went to the sheriff. Morrison had already been there spinning tales. Said Elizabeth had invited his attention, that when he tried to break it off, she'd gone wild, attacked him. His men backed every word. Joe laughed bitterly. Sheriff believed them. Morrison owned half the county. So you killed him, Sarah said softly. So I killed him. Waited 2 days. Let him think he'd won. Then I walked into his house during dinner in front of his wife and children and guests. And I shot him dead. Didn't hide it. Didn't run. Wanted everyone to know why. The preacher had friends. Judge, sheriff, town council. They tried him quick, found him guilty quicker. He was set to hang when Elizabeth's people, she had Cherokee blood, helped him escape. The poster's 10 years old, he said. Trail's long cold. Built myself a new life here. Tried to be a different man. Better man. But I can't undo what I did. Sarah moved then, closing distance between them. Sat beside him on the bed. You're not that man anymore. The Joe Coleman I know is gentle and patient and kind. He saves broken things instead of breaking them. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just better at hiding the violence. I've seen you violent. With Tom Briggs. You could have hurt him badly, but didn't. You controlled it. That's not a man who enjoys violence. That's a man who understands it's sometimes necessary, but takes no pleasure in it. They sat in silence. Then Joe reached for the portfolio, drawing out the charcoal portrait. Drew this on our 2nd anniversary. She complained about sitting still, but was secretly pleased. Always was vain about her hair. His finger traced the drawn cheek. Sometimes I can barely remember her voice, but I still see her clear when I close my eyes. You loved her very much. I did. Always will. He looked at Sarah. That bother you? Sarah considered. No. Love like that doesn't diminish. It just is. She was part of making you who you are. How could I resent that? Joe studied her with those gray eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Sarah McAllister. I'm a practical woman. We've all got our ghosts. Yours just have names and faces. He carefully returned the portrait, but surprised her by not hiding it. Instead, he placed it on the dresser in plain sight. No more secrets. You deserve to know who you're sharing a roof with. I already knew. Maybe not details, but I knew you were running from something. It's in the way you check the horizon, the way you sleep light, the way you built this place so far from anything. She paused. Takes one to know one, I suppose. You're not running from the law. No, just from a life that was crushing me slow, from expectations I couldn't meet, and a future I couldn't bear. She stood smoothing her skirts. We're both fugitives in our way. Joe stood too. For a moment they faced each other, weight of shared truth between them. The name on the poster, he said suddenly. It was Joseph Tanner. Sarah absorbed this gift, this final trust. Thank you for telling me, but you're Joe Coleman to me. That's who you've chosen to be. That's who matters. He nodded, tension leaving his shoulders. The secret that had stood between them was gone. In its place was something newer, deeper. I'll start supper, Sarah said, moving toward the door. Sarah. She turned back. I'm glad it was you who found it. Glad I don't have to carry it alone anymore. The winter morning dawned cold and clear. Sarah woke to find Joe already gone, but coffee waited on the stove, their usual routine. Except today felt different. 6 months since she'd stumbled off that stage, broken and afraid. She dressed carefully in green calico, made from fabric bought on their first trip to town. Fingers brushed the steel ring that had become part of her. In the kitchen, she found something unexpected. A small wooden box on the table. Inside was another ring. clearly old, made of gold, worn thin by years. A woman's wedding ring. Elizabeth's ring. Beneath it, a note in Joe's careful hand. She would have wanted it used for something good. If you're willing, I'd like to make us official real. Will you marry me, Joe? Sarah sank into a chair, both rings before her on scarred wood. The steel ring forged from old metal marked with brands of their ranch. The gold ring worn by a woman whose ghost had gently made room for the living. She found him in the barn, mending tack with steady hands, though tension showed in his shoulders. He looked up when she entered, and she saw everything in his eyes. Hope, fear, love that had grown so gradually she'd hardly noticed until it was essential as air. It's not about replacing her, he said quickly. Elizabeth, it's about choosing to live again. Choosing you. Choosing Sarah crossed to him, taking his calloused hands. I know. Yes. Yes to all of it. To the ranch, to the life we're building, to whatever comes next. Joe's smile transformed his weathered face. She could see the young man he'd been, the one who'd loved Elizabeth with wholehearted devotion, but also who he was, now older, scarred by loss, but deeper for it. When, he asked. Soon, before spring roundup. I want to plant the garden as your wife. They were married 2 weeks later in the Morrisons' parlor, Kate beaming, James standing witness. Nothing like the wedding Sarah had imagined as a girl. No white dress, no church bells, no crowd. Instead, she wore her best calico, and both rings steel on her right hand, gold on her left. The circuit preacher performed the simple ceremony with dignity. He didn't ask questions about their past, didn't raise eyebrows at this pairing. Out here, people understood you took happiness where you found it. Do you, Joseph Coleman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Sarah saw Joe's slight hesitation at the false name, but his voice was steady. I do. Do you, Sarah McAllister, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. No mention of love or obedience. Just simple promises to take each other, to choose each other, to face whatever came as one instead of two. When the preacher pronounced them married, Joe kissed her first time their lips had met. Gentle, careful, a question, more than statement. Sarah answered by leaning in hand, resting against his cheek. That night, standing in what was now their bedroom, Sarah felt uncertainty. They'd lived as careful friends for months. Now that barrier was gone. Joe seemed to sense her nervousness. We don't have to change everything at once. We've got time. But Sarah thought of time, lost chances, missed lives cut short. Elizabeth hadn't had time. The woman from St. Louis hadn't had time. She stepped close to him. This man who'd saved her without trying to own her, who'd offered shelter without price, who'd waited patiently for her to heal. When she kissed him this time, it wasn't gentle. It was sure and strong and full of promise. I don't want to waste any more time, she whispered. We've both been alone too long. What followed was tender and careful and right. Two people who'd known deep loss learning to trust again, to open again, to believe that maybe happiness wasn't always followed by sorrow. Later, lying in darkness with Joe's arm around her, Sarah touched the 2 rings on her hand. The steel one caught moonlight, practical, handmade, unique. The gold one seemed to glow with its own light, delicate, traditional carrying weight of another love story. Tell me about her, Sarah said. Elizabeth, tell me the good memories. She felt Joe's surprise, then relaxation. You want to hear about her? She was part of making you who you are. I want to know all of you. So he talked quietly about a woman who sang while she cooked and argued politics and cried over injured animals, who could outshoot most men and embroider like an angel, who had loved him fiercely and been loved in return. She would have liked you, Joe said finally, would have admired your strength, your practicality, the way you've made the garden flourish. I would have liked her too, though I'm glad I didn't have to share you. Joe's arm tightened. No sharing. You've got all of me now. Everything. It's worth everything. They fell asleep, curved together, like 2 parts of a whole. Outside, winter wind sang through the desert. A year later, the ranch barely resembled the quiet, isolated place Sarah had first seen. Life had filled empty spaces. Sound had replaced silence. The biggest change stood behind the house, a schoolhouse built from lumber Joe had hauled from town. Every morning, children arrived on horseback or in wagons, some traveling miles for the chance to learn. Sarah stood in the doorway watching her students scatter for lunch. The Hendricks boys raced toward the corral. Little Mary Patterson sat with her primer. The Martinez twins helped their younger sister. Mrs. Coleman ran up with a composition clutched in his hand. I finished my essay about the cattle drive. Sarah took the paper, scanning careful penmanship. This is excellent work, Timothy. Your descriptions are vivid. He beamed and ran to join friends. Sarah watched him go, one hand resting on her still flat belly, where new life grew. A secret she'd share with Joe tonight. They'd come so far from that desperate day in Cedar Ridge. Two broken souls who'd found each other across miles and years, and sorrow. Built something real from something broken. Made a home, a family, a future. The desert wind carried the sound of children's laughter, and Sarah smiled. Some things could indeed bloom in the hardest ground.